Welcome to the first edition, first recording, first episode of the Supply Chainy podcast, hosted by myself, Nathan Chaney. I am really excited today to feature Curtis Pogue, my best freight friend that I have in the world. Curtis, welcome to the Supply Chainy podcast. Just kind of kick things off a little bit, can you share a little bit about your personal story, your upbringing, and whatnot, kind of like how we got to this point?
It all started when my mother met my father.
Maybe we could skip a couple steps.
Yeah, real quick synopsis about me. Grew up in Texas. I actually did not finish high school. Ended up getting my GED and then went to community college twice. Second time was more successful. Did really well, got really good grades, ended up getting some scholarships, and ultimately going to University of North Texas, where you and I met. From there, I went to business school for logistics, supply chain management, and then kind of watched everybody go into the corporate world, and I got drew into trucking. I had some previous jobs that involved trucking and warehousing, and it was the less glamorous side of everybody that we were going to school with. To be quite honest, I had met, I think it was Jim Crane. He said there's money in trucking.
Oh, is there?
There's money in trucking. And so, college student, show me the money. And so I ended up interning for a company that was a startup. There was 5 of us. And I had the opportunity to work really close with Michael Fagelman, who was in the finance industry, and ended up getting into the trucking industry from a company called Aero Trucking, which was, at the time, it was the largest flatbed platform company in the entire country. Well, they had some issues where the founder of that company died, and then the son took over. Well, the board ended up, there were some issues with money, and at the end of the day, they left all their drivers stranded. I think they had 5,000 drivers. And on Christmas Eve, all of a sudden, they turned off all their fuel cards and basically said, we're closing the doors. Really bad deal. Well, Michael was able to obtain the son of that company and all the data that was attached to it, specifically the customers. And so what we did at TruePoint Logistics was basically pick up all the pieces that had been dropped on the floor at that time. And gosh, we built that company. I mean, I want to say we were maybe at $5,000 revenue a month, and then we were at $250,000 revenue a month, and we just kept building it, and then ultimately sold it off. And then I went to work for another company, kind of another startup situation, and we did it again. And that was with VSS Logistics, another trucking company, and these were both non-asset based trucking companies, which is difficult to say the least. And so I always wanted to try and make life easy, and I wanted to obtain assets, obtain trucks. And VSS, my partner at VSS, he was very adamant of hey, let's do this. Let's get assets. Let's get trucks. And then I ended up getting a phone call kind of out of nowhere from a guy at Landstar who is my grandfather's best friend. And he called me and said, hey, don't buy trucks, come see me. So I flew out, met with Alan Afshar, who has been with Landstar for 30 plus years, and talked me out of buying trucks. And then ultimately I started a Landstar agency and grew that, and then ended up buying trucks anyway, going against all the advice, and found out the reason why you should never buy assets.
And why is that?
you see
Can
all
you
this
wrap it up
gray in my
in
beard?
1 minute?
Yeah, all this gray in my beard here is, I'm only 23. That's why. A lot of issues, a lot of headaches, and there's been a lot of challenges in purchasing assets, no doubt.
I think that the audience would be really interested to hear kind of the economics of
Sure.
That purchase, how big of a fleet you got, and then you operated it for a little while, and then when you got out, I think things went well for you. Can you kind of like tell a little bit about how that story went?
Yeah, it's a common saying that somehow always I can fall into a pile of shit and still come out smelling like a handful of roses. I had a small fleet of trucks, a lot of W-2 drivers. All my drivers made really good money. I mean, they all made six figures a year. Trucks are not cheap. The average cost of most of the trucks that I purchased were anywhere from $140,000 to $160,000.
And you didn't worry about the trailer component. You just were buying the power unit.
No, that was just the power unit.
Yeah, yeah.
That was just the power unit. In the Landstar network, Landstar Corporate owns the trailers, and then the fleet owners or owner operators own the asset, the power unit. There were a lot of issues, especially during COVID, that certainly were challenges. All the new trucks have these new DEF systems. These DEF systems create kind of a myriad of issues dealing with parts and components that are consumable that have to be replaced. And all the units were new, and so they were all under warranty, so they had to go to the dealership. And we were finding that I could look at one of our power units in the course of a year, and at minimum, a brand new truck was going to be in the shop at least 4 to 6 times. And every time it would go to the shop, to the dealership, they wouldn't even look at it for 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, with the issues that the DEF systems are creating. Then you pair that or couple it with the parts availability, and sometimes a truck would sit at the dealership for a month and a half.
And how does that kind of work on your side as the carrier that's committed to moving loads and to providing a paycheck for a driver? How do you kind of cope when you've got that truck in the shop like that?
I think that's it's a two-part answer. The first part is that we were operating under contracts, right? So, I mean, from the point of RFQ to signing the contract with the legal department with our customers, we were guaranteeing a certain amount of capacity. And when our capacity would drop because we'd have a piece of equipment that was having to get worked on, we would still have to fulfill that agreement. And so then if it took more money to get something covered, well, then we had to eat that. The second part to that is that I personally, if a driver's truck was down, I would still guarantee them that they would get a paycheck. They still got $1,000 a week no matter what, because it's not their fault their truck was broken.
Right.
And so that obviously would cost us. You have a truck payment. Truck payment could be $2,000 to $3,000 a month. You add insurance, that could be $500, $700 a month. So pretty quickly, a truck being down could cost us $5,000, $6,000 in a snap of a finger. So we would try and build that in as much as we could into our contracts, but that was one of the biggest challenges that we would face. And you certainly wouldn't think that would be the case when you have some of the newest and nicest equipment.
And to kind of like talk about the upside when you kind of exited being a fleet owner,
Sure.
I think you were able to capitalize on the value of these power units out in the market, right? And kind of unload those back to the dealership again or something like that?
Yeah, so I was able to, and I can't attest to the current situation of today, but I can tell you that in less than a year ago, I was able to offload every single power unit that I owned back to the dealerships for more than what we originally purchased them for. Our oldest truck was 2016. And at the time, I think, gosh, that truck was only $100,000, and we had that asset for years and turned around and sold it for $120,000. I mean, it's just, it was kind of crazy.
Would you attribute that a little bit to luck, and just the market circumstances of the time and timing all just worked out well for you, right?
Market and timings, right? I mean, that's any kind of investment. It's all about the markets and timing. So it just happened to be that I saw the timing was right, the markets were right, and I'd like to say that I'm in business for the glory of things, but the reality of it is, at the end of the day, it's for $1. What's the motivation behind starting a podcast series?
So it stems from the fact that I went into the video production and the YouTube side of the industry, and I started creating this brand Supply Chainy, and then I came up with this idea, filmed this series called Supply Chainy on Tour, which is a little bit like MTV Cribs / how it's made for operations and warehouses and that sort of thing. And that was, I was having a lot of fun with that. But I wasn't really, if you want to say, getting the amount of subscribers and viewers that I was really looking for. And I do want to have as much of an impact as I can. And what I started to realize is that people that are in the supply chain industry, that are kind of influenced, that are content creators, their podcasts have much more of an audience and get much more traction than their YouTube channels. So folks that have thousands, 20,000 followers or whatnot in one channel, like in podcasts or in LinkedIn, their YouTube channel only has 100, 200 subscribers. And so there's a very big difference. And what I've come to realize is that a podcast is something that you can consume while you're driving to work, while you're running, doing some exercises, while you're just doing other stuff, cooking dinner. So you can more passively take in, a podcast and kind of hear directly from people that are in the industry, that are experts, or that are people that are driving results today, people that are creating the supply chains of tomorrow. You can take all that in and multitask at the same time. Whereas in a YouTube sort of format, you do need to kind of focus a little bit more because it's more visual focused. And so what I want to do is layer on this podcast kind of onto that YouTube. I'll never fully depart from visuals. So all my podcasts are all going to be recorded like this one and put up onto YouTube and places where people can watch them as well, because I think there's a lot of value in that. But I also want to make sure that I have the audio only version. And my big inspiration for this really is my favorite podcast, which is How I Built This. I've been listening to that podcast for years and years, and I know you and I have shared, hey, you got to listen to this podcast because you and I share that entrepreneurial passion. And so that's really where my main inspiration for this comes from. And it's why I want to highlight the voices of people that are the doers, that get things done today. And I also want to highlight those people that are innovating and creating the supply chains of tomorrow. So I really want to try to get both of those voices on the podcast. Okay. And from an audience perspective, I really want to try to be able to share a story and information that appeals to early career individuals, people that maybe are business majors and don't know exactly what they want to study or what field they want to go into after school, but also appeal to people who are business owners or leaders of a company where they can take some nuggets of wisdom from these conversations as well. So I know that's a really ambitious sort of goal, right? To try to cover the entire supply chain, which is huge. Try to appeal both to the folks that are getting things done today and the innovators and the sort of folks that are pushing the industry forward. And then also appeal to, the younger folks just starting their careers and appeal to the really experienced professionals. So I know it's a really big undertaking for sure, but I will endeavor to try to accomplish it nevertheless.
Well, if anybody can do it, you can, certainly.
We'll see. You've seen a lot of the industry. So a question that comes to mind is, what are 3 things that you know to be true about the logistics and transportation industry?
I think I said this before, but if everything's going right, something's wrong. People ask me sometimes, what's your job? And I say I'm a firefighter because all I do is put out fires, right? Yeah. It's the only time I work is when there's a problem. And I work all the time. So second thing would probably be to, dealing with trucking companies and customers. Never never take the word of a trucking company to be truth unless you have verification. Because you don't want to say something that somebody's told you that's incorrect and then pass that information along. Now you're the one with the wrong information. And third, just always follow up. Do what you say you're going to do, and always follow up. And if you do those two things, you can't help but to be successful.
There are folks that are looking to become fleet owners, that are looking to become agency owners in the freight world and kind of move into this industry. Is there any advice you would give to those folks?
Relationships. Relationships are everything. Technical skills of data analytics and being able to do heuristic models and all that is really good. It's the relationships, it's the connections. I would attribute my entire career to those different organizations that I was part of, going to presentations, just expand your network. And while LinkedIn is great, I still truly believe that nothing beats the physical connection of meeting somebody.
You've done brokerage and fleet ownership and management for a number of years. And although you probably had many successes and things that went right, as everything in logistics and freight and trucking and transportation, there's definitely things that go wrong. So is there one particular failure that you had to contend with and kind of make it as good as you could with what you had to work with? And what lessons did you learn from that massive failure?
Those who are in the industry already know nothing goes right. If anything goes right, there's something wrong. I think what keeps me engaged in this industry is just that it's this constant problem solving. So as far as in my career and big failures, there's been plenty. One of the biggest ones that come to mind initially, because I just had to deal with something in regards to this, but we were putting in big data centers for Google, and we have these huge basically generators. One of the most difficult states to deal with is South Carolina. We had a couple units going into South Carolina. Everything was lined up. I mean, police escorts, utility trucks or boom trucks to be able to lift utility lines out of the way. Escorts, 2 in front, 3 in the back. I mean, very large units, shut down a whole highway kind of situation. You can only move so many hours a day. So what a lot of people would call a logistical nightmare, and I would just call it Tuesday. So anyway, we had permits lined up for all the different states. I think we were going through about 6 different states. So a lot of moving pieces. And there was some paperwork that was not submitted correctly to one of the states, and we got stuck at the border. And we got and there was some discrepancies in the paperwork, and at the end of the day, I signed off on that paperwork, and so this was my fault. And so that one ended up costing that $60,000 mistake, I believe. Yeah, it was a big deal. I think that driver was stuck at the border for weeks.
Wow.
Weeks. Yeah.
Was there an option to reroute around that state?
No. There's no. That's not an option. The state dictates the route. So if there's a problem with another state, the state that you're in is not going to reroute you. They've already given you your route, and there's no deviation. For a variety of reasons, right? I mean, they go through and they determine where a superload can go based upon highways, access, the different municipalities that are involved. But at the end of the day, it all worked out. We were able to put in some redundancies, kind of treat it like a NASA mission, and where things fall through the cracks, you have to be able to not only learn from those mistakes, but then be able to put in kind of a catch-fail system, right? a second layer, especially those really important things that do or can end up costing a lot of money. You have to have redundancies. The amount of time that it takes to double check or triple check something, or to put in another layer of management to be able to go through and identify any issues, is a small cost to pay when you could potentially be looking at $60,000 mistake that could have cost us $150 in labor to be able to.
Jeez.
Yeah, I know, right.
You started to talk about lessons learned and kind of getting a little philosophical there. Maybe that's a good segue to talk about what is a favorite quote that you live by, or like your personal mission statement.
Sure.
I'm happy to kind of share mine, but do you have one of those?
Let's see yours. Yeah.
Okay. So for me, my favorite quote is typically attributed to John A. Shedd.
Okay.
And the quote basically says, "Ships are safest in harbor, but that's not what ships were built for." And that's kind of my life sort of mantra, and I try to stay true to that, which is to not be comfortable and to always be pushing forward and being innovative and doing something different and being outside of that comfort zone a little bit. Yes, it's comfortable to be in harbor, but because my spirit animal, is an entrepreneur. And so I feel like I have this yearning to go adventure and explore and be outside of that safety bubble. And this podcast and kind of everything I'm doing with Supply Chainy all represents that. So that quote, I think really just wraps up sort of my ethos. And so that's my favorite quote / life mission.
The one that goes in my mind was actually from Bill Lamoth, who was somebody that I was introduced to at a networking event, which I think you know Bill, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And he said, I asked him, I said, hey, how have you become successful? What is it? What's the it factor, right? And he said, look, I'm not any smarter than you or the next guy. I don't really necessarily have any special talents, but when I make a goal, when I set a goal, I'm like a laser guided missile towards that goal. And that's always stuck with me. So yeah, that's been the most impactful, I think, quote that was personally given to me that you won't find on the internet.
Yeah. Well, now you will. The interesting thing is thinking about that and kind of knowing Bill is that when he told that to you at that networking event, there was definitely no way he was thinking this will be something that 10 years from now, Curtis is going to be telling on a podcast as being his life mission goal,
right.
Statement. And so I think that speaks heavily to the fact that we, even though we have mentors ourselves, there are people that listen to us and look to us that have been doing things and been around and seen a few things in our life. There's things that we do and say that are being picked up and heard and digested and thought about long after we've said it and long after we think the impact has come and gone. That one thing that you said or that I said or someone said, it has staying power. It's very possible. And so now that I've just said that, I've realized I'm one of those people that thinks out loud and I talk in order to think, and I should probably be a little more careful because the things that I say when I'm talking to students and
you never know
classes,
what might be picked up.
You have no idea. 10 years from now, someone's gonna be saying, "Well, Nathan said during this speech to my class, yada yada yada." Right?
Sure.
It could either be a great thing that is a life, a compass heading for them, or it could be that was the dumbest thing I've ever heard someone say.
It could be a missile or a bomb, right? Yeah.
I happen to know that you've diversified a little bit away from transportation here recently. Can you talk a little about one of your most recent endeavors and how logistics is still involved?
Absolutely. So I think I just did it because the restaurant industry is supposed to be the most challenging. And so I think I'm just doing it out of spite, just to defy the odds. But as far as supply chain management and the restaurant industry, absolutely direct link, right? From a vendor management standpoint, being able to go through and do analysis between vendors, being able to utilize my purchasing power with those vendors to be able to get better rates. And at the end of the day, putting the vendors against each other for the competition to be able to reduce rates. Then the inventory management side of, the cost of inventory versus the cost of stockouts, right? Like what's the cost associated with that if somebody comes in and we don't have something because we've ran out of something? But what's that additional cost of those items on the shelf in the stock room? Just being able to roll everything in and utilizing all of the supply chain principles. We use an inventory management system. We've associated the cost of what we have identified as a stock out of not having something and the potential ramifications for that as far as somebody coming in not having what they want and then that potentially delay their decision to come back in. And we've been able to kind of build these models based upon where people fit, based upon capturing data. And so I think maybe that's the answer to your question is data. Being able to use that data, but then again, make those decisions on if we have a stockout situation, what that can cost, and what it costs us to keep something on hand and potentially run into a spoilage issue. So yeah, it's inventory management, right?
So what's the best part of kind of owning and operating, a barbecue restaurant for you?
It doesn't matter what the business is. It's the business side of it. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter if it's barbecue. It doesn't matter if it's camper vans. It doesn't matter if it's trucking, right? Like widgets of any type. It's the business side of it. And for me specifically, the logistics side of all the components coming together, from the supply chain side of just here are all these pieces that are going to contribute to what our goal is of whatever it is that we're doing. And so just understanding that there are all of these players, these links and nodes that contribute to whatever the goal is of whatever that widget is. And so all those links and nodes affect this thing that I'm going to give you. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let it be a product, service, doesn't matter, right? It's understanding that there are multiple pieces, multiple players that make things happen. And that's the principle of supply chain, right?
Yeah. I like to tell people that I like to play business.
I like to play business.
And I think that you share that sort of sentiment, that it's just the reward at the end of the day is that you've built something and that you can kind of stand back from it and say like, yeah, that's what I did. That's pretty cool. Now let's go do something else, right?
Yeah, I've been chasing that feeling my whole life. Of at one point, I built houses, working hard all day long, and building a wall and standing that wall up at the end of the day, and to be able to step back and say, I built this, I did this. That satisfaction of being able to build something is unrivaled. So it doesn't matter what you're building, as long as you're building and you can step back and say, I built this. And I think there's a podcast on that. The satisfaction, again, it's satisfying, for lack of a better word.
The satisfaction is satisfying.
It's satisfying.
You heard it here first, folks.
There you go.
Well, hey, Curtis, I think that was a great note to close on for today. And I appreciate you being the first guest to come on the Supply Chainy podcast. Lending some of your experience as a freight broker, as a fleet owner, as a barbecue restaurateur, and a little bit of everything else, and sharing some of your thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think what you're doing for the industry, from a inspirational college student to, again, a seasoned professional, I think that you're really going to be able to shorten that distance in between the two, and be able to fill in everything that is tied to supply chain. And yeah, I'm really excited to watch this grow and just see what you do with this thing, man, because you're one of the most talented and inspirational people I know.
No. We don't need. Yeah, I'm not going to pay you to say that later on.
Remember, you got my Venmo information, right?